she gave up her last $5 to save a dog no one wanted. On a grey Saturday morning in Riverton, the market was alive with chatter, bargains, and the smell of fresh bread. But in the shadows of Tomlin's junk stall, a sound rose above it all. A weak, broken whine. 7-year-old June Hartley, her small hand clutching an inhaler and the $5 bill her father gave her for emergencies, stopped dead in her tracks. What she found under that table wasn't treasure. It was a German shepherd, bones showing through his fur, eyes clouded with pain. Everyone else turned away. Tomlin called him worthless, but June saw something no one else did. With trembling fingers and tears streaking her cheeks, she made a choice that would change everything. She handed over her last $5, not for herself, but for him. She didn't know yet that this dog carried her family's deepest secret, one tied to her father's grief and her uncle's sacrifice. From that moment, nothing in Riverton would ever be the same. The town of Riverton still bore its scars like an old soldier. 6 months had passed since the flood, yet reminders lingered everywhere. Blue tarps stretched tight across rooftops, the smell of damp wood still clinging to the air, and the half-finished frames of houses left abandoned when their owners never returned. The main street had reopened, patched with gravel and fresh asphalt in places, but the sidewalks cracked like the lines on an old hand. Riverton wasn't the same town it had once been, but for those who stayed, there was a certain grit, a resilience that came not from choice, but necessity. On that Saturday morning, sunlight broke through thin clouds, pale and fragile, like it too was struggling to come back after the storm. A faint chill lingered, the kind that seeped into bones and reminded people how quickly weather could turn cruel. The old mill market was already awake, its jumble of vendor stalls buzzing faintly with voices, laughter, and the clatter of goods. It was the kind of place where life, even wounded, refused to stop moving forward. June Hartley clutched her inhaler in one hand, the other gripping a crumpled $5 bill her father had pressed into her palm before leaving for the police station that morning. Just in case, Nolan had said in his steady, tired voice. He always said that. Just in case the pharmacy was open. Just in case she had an attack. Just in case her lungs, fragile since the day she was born, reminded them both that she was never truly free of their grip. At 7 years old, June knew more about breathing than most children did. She knew the slow, shallow pull when her chest tightened, the dizzy wave of panic when air didn't come as easily as it should. But she also knew joy, the way her auburn hair whipped around when she ran too far ahead of her grandmother, or the sparkle in her hazel eyes when she discovered something new. Curiosity burned in her like a small flame, one that no sickness had managed to dim. This morning, she walked a little ahead of Evelyn, her grandmother, who moved at her own unhurried pace. Evelyn's silver hair was twisted into its usual bun, and her hands, knotted by years of arthritis, held a canvas bag, ready to be filled with market treasures. At 72, she was the kind of woman who carried both kindness and authority in equal measure. People at the market knew her. They stopped to greet her, offered fresh bread or pies at half price, not out of pity, but because she had become a fixture of Riverton's survival. Evelyn had been there through the storm and after, baking bread for neighbors without power, knitting blankets for children whose homes had been swept away. "Stay close, Junebug," Evelyn called, her voice warm but touched with caution. "Crowds are bigger today." "I will, Grandma," June answered, though her feet were already carrying her toward the row of stalls where glass jars gleamed in the sun. Her small fingers brushed the smooth tops, eyes wide, as though each jar of honey or jam held its own mystery. Behind them, Nolan's absence was like a shadow that traveled with them. He had left before sunrise, uniform pressed, but eyes heavy, another long shift waiting for him. As Riverton's police officer, sometimes it's only one, he carried more than his share of burdens. Since the flood, crime had risen, tempers had shortened, and patience had worn thin. People who once trusted each other now locked their doors and argued over scraps of insurance money. Nolan's broad shoulders bore it silently, but Evelyn saw the toll in the lines deepening at the corners of his mouth, in the grey streaks that had begun threading through his dark hair. June noticed it too, though in her child's way. She noticed the way he sometimes stared too long at his boots before putting them on, or how he sighed at night when he thought she was asleep. She loved her father fiercely, even when he was distant, even when his voice carried an edge of fatigue. She knew he was trying, always trying, to make life better for her. That $5 bill in her palm was proof of it. She held it tightly now, pressing it against the metal of her inhaler, like the two belonged together. In her heart, she believed the money wasn't for medicine this time. She wasn't sure what it was for yet, but she felt a strange pull in her chest, as if something important was waiting. The market smelled of cinnamon rolls, sawdust, and fresh apples. Vendors called out their specials. Laughter rippled here and there, and the chatter of neighbors filled the morning air. Yet beneath it all, there was a quiet sadness, a shared memory of water rising too high, too fast. Evelyn heard it in the lowered voices when people mentioned families who had left. June felt it in the way adults sometimes looked at her, as if the sight of a fragile child breathing carefully through an inhaler was too much a reminder of how quickly life could be taken. Evelyn reached June's side, slipping her hand gently onto the girl's shoulder. "Now, Junebug," she said with a smile that carried both mischief and tenderness. "Don't go wandering too far. You've got that sparkle in your eye that means trouble." June giggled, clutching both inhaler and money tighter. "Not trouble. Adventure." Evelyn laughed softly, shaking her head. "That's what your daddy used to say before every scraped knee and broken window." Her voice dipped for a moment, heavy with memory, but she quickly steadied it. "Come along. Let's see what the market has for us today." As they walked deeper into the rows of stalls, June's gaze darted everywhere. At the hand-woven baskets, the carved wooden toys, the piles of late autumn vegetables. But her steps slowed near the far corner, where Tomlin, the junk dealer, had set up his usual cluttered table. Rusted tools, dented pans, and battered signs leaned haphazardly against one another. There was nothing magical there, at least not for most people. But June lingered, eyes narrowing, as if she'd heard something. It wasn't quite a sound, more like a tug, a sense that beneath all that discarded metal and wood, something waited. She pressed the $5 bill tighter in her hand without realizing it, as if her heart already knew its purpose. Evelyn was already chatting with Mrs. Weller at the preserve stall, her laughter carrying easily across the narrow path. Nolan's absence pressed heavier on June then, though she didn't have the words to name it. She wished he could be here, not the tired version of him, but the version who used to lift her high into the air, who used to tell her bedtime stories about brave heroes. Maybe if he saw what she felt now, he'd understand. The breeze shifted, carrying with it the faintest sound. A whine, sharp and pained, almost swallowed by the noise of the market. June froze. Her chest tightened, and she instinctively reached for her inhaler, though she didn't press it yet. The sound came again, low and desperate, pulling her toward Tomlin's stall like a thread tugging a needle. She hesitated, glanced back at Evelyn, then stepped closer. Her shoes crunched on gravel. Her pulse quickened. The $5 bill grew damp in her palm. Something was waiting for her. Something broken. Something she couldn't ignore. And though she didn't know it yet, that single step forward would change everything. Not just for her, but for her father, for her grandmother, and for a wounded German shepherd whose amber eyes were about to meet hers. The old mill market had always been a place where Riverton's soul seemed to gather, stitched together from scraps of resilience. Stalls overflowed with jars of jam, loaves of bread, carved toys, second-hand clothes, and trinkets pulled from attics. Evelyn was in her element here, pausing at every table to chat with vendors she had known for decades. Her voice as much a part of the place as the smell of cinnamon rolls drifting through the air. "Morning, Henry," she greeted a man stacking jars of honey. "Looks like the bees worked harder than all of us this year." Henry chuckled, wiping his hands on his apron. "Wouldn't be Riverton without your laugh, Evelyn. You take this jar." On the house, Evelyn shook her head, insisting on paying, though her wrinkled smile betrayed gratitude. She moved along at her steady pace, greeting one neighbor after another, her canvas bag gradually filling. But June's attention had already drifted. She walked a little apart, her small fingers tracing the edges of old coins displayed on a velvet cloth, her hazel eyes darting with restless curiosity. Something inside her hummed, a quiet sense that there was more to find today than sweets or toys. The market was a chorus of sounds, vendors calling out prices, children laughing, the clink of glass bottles. Yet amid all the familiar noises, June heard something different, a sharp whine, faint, almost hidden. Her chest tightened as she stopped near the farthest stall, Tomlin's table, cluttered with rusted tools, dented pans, and scraps of metal that looked one step away from the dump. Most people passed it by, but June lingered. The sound came again, unmistakably pained, slipping out like a cry someone wanted the world to ignore. She crouched low, her braid sliding off her shoulder as she lifted the edge of the stained tablecloth. The dim space beneath was shadowed, but then she saw them, a pair of amber eyes, wide and hollow with suffering, staring back at her. The breath caught in her throat. A German shepherd lay curled in the dirt, ribs jutting through filthy, matted fur. His flank was smeared with dried blood, and one hind leg twisted awkwardly, trembling whenever he tried to shift. Flies hovered where the fur was thinnest. Yet even in his brokenness, he lifted his head to meet June's gaze, not with fear, but with a quiet, piercing intensity. "Grandma," June whispered, her voice shaking. But Evelyn was still 2 stalls away, deep in conversation. Before June could call louder, Tomlin noticed her. The junk dealer's scowl was as permanent as the grease on his hands. He strode over, broom in hand, and jabbed it under the table. "Out! Get out of there, mutt!" he barked, striking the ground near the dog. The shepherd yelped and tried to crawl backward, dragging his injured leg. "No!" June cried, springing to her feet. Her hands balled into fists at her sides. Tomlin turned his glare on her. "This stray's been following me since the junkyard. Nasty thing. Won't leave me alone. Good for nothing but trouble." He swung the broom again, and the shepherd flinched, but did not growl. He simply looked back at June, eyes desperate but dignified. "Stop it!" June's voice cracked, tears already threatening. "He's hurt." "Hurt, worthless, same thing," Tomlin muttered. "A dog like that doesn't last. Better he crawl off and die than scare off my customers." June stepped between Tomlin and the shepherd, trembling but resolute. "Don't touch him!" For a moment, the man seemed surprised by the child's defiance. Then he laughed bitterly. "You want this sack of bones, kid? Take him. But don't come crying when he keels over before nightfall." Evelyn arrived then, alarm flashing in her eyes as she took in the scene. "June Hartley," she said sharply. "What on earth—" "Grandma, please," June interrupted, her voice breaking as she pointed under the table. "He's dying. Look at him. He needs us." Evelyn bent down, peering under the tablecloth, her heart clenched at the sight. The dog's condition was pitiful, beyond neglect. Yet when her gaze met his, something flickered. An unspoken plea, the kind that bypasses reason and strikes straight to the soul. But Evelyn's practical mind warred with her heart. "Sweetheart, we can't. Your father will never allow—" "I'll take care of him," June said, her cheeks wet now. She clutched her inhaler in one hand as if it were her anchor, the other reaching back toward Evelyn. "Please, Grandma. If we leave him here, he'll die. You know he will." "June." Evelyn's voice faltered. "I have money," June insisted, fumbling in her pocket with small fingers until the crumpled $5 bill appeared. She held it up, shaking, her chest rising unevenly with the effort of her words. "Dad gave it to me. I'll spend it. Just don't let him suffer." Evelyn's breath caught. The $5 bill, meant for emergencies, for medicine, for life itself when June's fragile lungs betrayed her. And yet, here was the child, willing to trade her own safety for a broken animal. Her heart ached with the weight of it. Tomlin smirked, leaning on his broom. $5 and he's yours. Won't fetch a penny more anyway." Evelyn turned on him, fury flashing in her usually gentle eyes. "Shame on you, Harold Tomlin. That animal deserves compassion, not cruelty." But Tomlin only shrugged. Money's money. June's tears spilled freely now, streaking her cheeks. "Grandma, please." Her voice was small, but it cut deeper than any argument. Evelyn looked from the trembling child to the battered dog, and in that moment she saw it all. The echo of her son Nolan's stubbornness, the shadow of loss that hung over their family, and the faint light of hope in a pair of amber eyes. She sighed, defeated by love. "All right, Junebug, we'll take him." June let out a sob of relief, collapsing against her grandmother's side before darting forward. She crouched low, reaching out a trembling hand. "It's okay now," she whispered to the dog. "You're safe." The German shepherd, cautious but trusting, shifted forward despite his limp, pressing his nose gently into her palm. His fur was coarse, damp with sweat and dirt, but June didn't flinch. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with the certainty that something important had just begun. Behind them, Tomlin pocketed the bill with a grunt. "Don't say I didn't warn you." But June didn't hear him. She was lost in the steady weight of the shepherd's gaze, a silent promise exchanged between a broken dog and a fragile child. Neither knew how deep that promise would go, or how far it would carry them. But in that instant, the bond had already been sealed. Evelyn's sigh was heavy as she bent to help. "Come on then. Let's get him into the car before your father sees what kind of trouble we've bought for $5. June stroked the shepherd's muzzle again, whispering through tears, "We'll call you Sable." The dog's ears twitched faintly at the sound, as though the name had been waiting for him all along. The marketplace had begun to thin, the morning sun pushing higher and turning the dew into rising mist. Vendors shouted last-minute bargains. Children tugged at their mothers' skirts, and the smell of fresh bread mingled with the metallic tang of Tomlin's junk stall. Yet for June, the noise faded into a dull hum. All she could hear was the sound of the battered shepherd's breathing, ragged, uneven, like a bellows on its last embers. Her hand was still pressed to his muzzle, her thumb brushing the damp fur beneath his eye. He had not looked away once. Those amber eyes locked onto her as if she were the only thread tying him to this world. Tomlin leaned on his broom, the corner of his mouth twisted into a smirk. $5 and he's yours, he repeated, the words rolling out like a taunt. Evelyn's lips pressed into a hard line. She knew what that money was for. It was never to be touched except in emergencies. Nolan had drilled it into her as firmly as he had into June. That $5 bill could mean the difference between breath and suffocation. For a child with fragile lungs, an inhaler wasn't a luxury. It was life itself. But June was already digging into her pocket with small, determined hands. The crumpled bill appeared, damp from her nervous grip. She smoothed it against her skirt, her face pale with the weight of what she was giving up. "June," Evelyn whispered urgently, "think carefully. This is your emergency money. What if—" "I know," June's voice trembled, but her eyes didn't leave the shepherd. "But if I don't, he'll die. And then it will be my fault." Her chest rose quickly, and for a moment Evelyn feared the weight of emotion might trigger an attack. But June clutched her inhaler in her other hand like an anchor, drawing in a steadying breath. She turned back to Tomlin, her chin lifted in quiet defiance. "Here." She extended the $5 bill, her small fingers shaking. Tomlin snatched it with a grunt of satisfaction. "Sold," he muttered, stuffing it into his pocket. "Don't say I didn't warn you. That mutt won't last the week." Evelyn exhaled slowly, resignation softening her features. The decision had been made, not by her, not by Nolan, but by the fierce compassion of a 7-year-old girl who could not look away from suffering. "All right then," she murmured, kneeling beside June. "Let's get him up. Gently now." Together, grandmother and granddaughter coaxed the dog from beneath the table. He rose shakily, his injured leg trembling as he put weight on it. Every movement was a struggle, but he did not growl, did not snap. He simply followed the small, beckoning hand of the child who had chosen him, as though her willpower alone pulled him forward. The shepherd's ribs pressed sharp beneath his skin, his frame once powerful now wasted. But as he limped free of the stall, the morning light caught in his eyes. They glowed with a startling intensity. Amber, molten, alive. The moment his gaze met June's, she felt her breath hitch. Not from asthma, not from fear, but from something else, something she couldn't yet name. It was as if the dog was speaking without words, a silent promise binding the two of them together. "You're safe now," June whispered, so softly that Evelyn barely heard it. Her palm slid down the dog's neck, fingers brushing the coarse tangles of fur. "No one's going to hurt you again. I promise." The shepherd's tail gave the faintest thump against the dirt, a gesture so small it might have been missed, but June saw it, and her face lit with a fragile kind of hope. Evelyn rose slowly, brushing dust from her skirt. Her sigh carried both resignation and something softer, an ache of recognition. She had seen this look before, long ago, in her son Nolan's eyes, when he was about June's age. Stubborn compassion, fierce loyalty, the kind of determination that could carry a child further than her fragile body ever should. "All right, Junebug," Evelyn said quietly. "Let's get him into the car before your father gets home and has a fit." It took both of them, Evelyn steadying his hindquarters, June coaxing him forward with gentle words, to guide the shepherd toward the old station wagon parked on the edge of the market. The dog limped, but never faltered, as though drawn by the child's voice. A few vendors paused to watch, whispers trailing after them. That Hartley girl took in a stray thing, looks half dead. Evelyn ignored them, though her cheeks burned with the weight of small-town eyes. Riverton was kind, but it had a long memory, and it wasn't quick to forgive mistakes, real or imagined. When they finally reached the car, Evelyn spread an old quilt across the back seat. "Up you go," she murmured, giving the shepherd a gentle boost. He collapsed onto the blanket with a sigh that sounded almost human, his head resting on his paws. June climbed in beside him before Evelyn could protest, her small hands stroking his back, careful to avoid the worst of the wounds. The shepherd didn't resist. He simply closed his eyes, as though surrendering his broken body to her care. For a long moment, Evelyn stood there, one hand on the car door, watching them. June's auburn hair spilled across her shoulders as she bent over the dog, her freckles stark against her pale skin. The child's lips moved in a whisper, too quiet to catch. But Evelyn didn't need to hear the words. She knew. A promise had been made, and promises like that, made in innocence, sealed in desperation, had a way of shaping lives in ways no one could foresee. Evelyn slid into the driver's seat, her fingers trembling as she started the engine. She glanced in the rearview mirror. June's head rested against the shepherd's neck, her hand still stroking his fur, as though to reassure both of them. Those amber eyes opened again, fixing on June. They didn't look like the eyes of an animal resigned to death. They looked like the eyes of a soldier who had found his post again. Watchful. Waiting. Evelyn looked away quickly, her chest tightening with unease. As the car rolled out of the market, Tomlin's stall disappeared in the mirror. But the weight of the choice, the $5 bill, the risk, the fragile child and the broken dog, remained heavy in Evelyn's heart. She whispered to herself, barely audible over the engine, "Lord, help us. What have we just brought home?" The garage smelled faintly of oil and old wood, a place that had always felt more like Nolan's domain than June's. Rusting tools lined the pegboard wall, and a stack of tires leaned in the corner like watchmen keeping their silent vigil. But that evening, as the fading light stretched long through the high window, the space transformed into something else, a sanctuary. Evelyn had spread an old patchwork quilt across the concrete floor, her hands slow and careful, as though she knew this fragile beginning needed gentleness. June darted back and forth with nervous energy, carrying bowls of water and scraps of leftover stew from last night's dinner. Her small frame seemed too slight for the burden she carried, but her determination filled the room like fire. The German shepherd lay sprawled on the quilt, ribs jutting through his matted fur. His breathing came in uneven sighs, each one tugging at June's chest. She had expected him to snap, to lash out the way stories always warned dogs in pain would, but he hadn't. Not once. Instead, his eyes tracked her every movement, glowing in the dim light, like twin embers refusing to die. "Here," June whispered, setting down the bowl of water. She crouched low, her face close to his. "You need to drink." "Just a little." The shepherd's tongue flicked once, then again, lapping at the water with slow, deliberate care. June's lips curved into a tremulous smile, the first she had allowed herself since the market. Evelyn stood in the doorway, arms folded against the evening chill. She said nothing, but her gaze softened as she watched her granddaughter's quiet ministrations. There was something in June's posture, tender, reverent, that reminded her of Catherine, the girl's late mother. That same instinct to comfort, to mend, even when the world itself seemed frayed beyond repair. June lifted the second bowl, the stew thick with carrots and bits of meat. She stirred it with a spoon, blowing gently to cool it, before sliding it closer. "It's not fresh, but it's better than nothing," she murmured. The shepherd hesitated, nostrils flaring. Then, with effort, he pushed himself to a shaky stand on 3 legs, lowering his head to eat. June laughed softly, a sound like the tinkling of wind chimes, relief pouring out of her. "See? He likes it, Grandma. He really likes it." "Don't give him too much too fast," Evelyn cautioned gently. "A stomach that empty will protest." June nodded solemnly, as though accepting instructions for the most important task of her life. She stroked the shepherd's back as he ate, her fingers tracing the ridges of bone beneath the tangled coat. That was when she noticed it. Something hard, something unnatural, pressed against her fingertips, beneath the fur near his neck. She parted the hair carefully, her breath catching as a thin, tarnished chain glinted in the low light. A fragment of metal hung there, obscured by mud and blood. "What's this?" she whispered, more to herself than to Evelyn. The shepherd paused mid-bite, his head lifting slightly, as though aware of her discovery. June's fingers hovered over the chain, but she didn't tug. Not yet. Some instinct told her the secret could wait until tomorrow. Instead, she focused on the sheen of his coat, the way the dark hair across his back seemed deeper, richer than the rest, coal black, dense, like shadow. "You need a name," she whispered, brushing his fur again. "Something strong, something that fits." Her hazel eyes studied him, intent and unyielding. Then the word slipped from her lips, like it had been waiting all along. "Sable." The shepherd's ears twitched. His gaze met hers again, steady, solemn, and startlingly intelligent. "Yes," June said with conviction, her voice steadier now. "That's your name. Sable." The dog's tail thumped once against the quilt. Just once. But it was enough. Enough for June to feel like the universe itself had nodded in agreement. Evelyn shifted in the doorway, emotion tightening her throat. She wanted to caution June, to remind her that strays were unpredictable, that her father would never approve, that hearts could break just as easily as they could heal. But the words lodged in her chest, because in that moment, under the flicker of the single bare bulb, it was clear that this wasn't just a child naming a stray. It was something older, deeper, a covenant. June leaned forward, pressing her forehead gently to Sable's. "You're safe now," she whispered. "No one can hurt you anymore. Not while I'm here." The shepherd closed his eyes, his breathing evening out, as if soothed by her vow. For a while, the garage held only the sound of rain tapping against the roof, steady and patient. Evelyn watched until June's eyelids began to droop, exhaustion tugging at her small frame. She stepped forward then, laying a hand on her granddaughter's shoulder. "Time for bed, Junebug," she said softly. "But he'll be lonely," June protested, blinking hard to stay awake. "I'll leave the light on for him," Evelyn promised. "And we'll check first thing in the morning." June hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. She bent once more to kiss Sable's forehead, her lips brushing the rough fur. "Good night, Sable." As Evelyn guided her inside, she glanced back one last time. The shepherd lay stretched on the quilt, eyes half-lidded but watchful. His gaze lingered not on the door, but on the little girl disappearing through it. And beneath the matted fur, the chain glinted again, silent, waiting, carrying a truth that none of them yet understood. The rumble of Nolan Hartley's patrol car echoed against the quiet street as he pulled into the driveway, headlights sweeping across the familiar frame of the old garage. It was nearly 9 o'clock, hours later than he'd promised June. His bones ached with the weight of the shift. 3 domestic calls, a minor car accident, and paperwork that seemed endless. The uniform clung to him like a second skin, damp with sweat, and his eyes burned from fatigue. For Nolan, nights like these had become routine. What wasn't routine was the faint glow spilling from the crack beneath the garage door. His brow furrowed. Evelyn usually turned everything off before bed. He rubbed a hand over his face, exhaling. Probably June again. Probably forgot something. He pushed the door open and froze. There, lying on an old quilt in the middle of the garage, was a massive German shepherd. Its body stretched across the patchwork like a shadow-given flesh, ribs showing, fur ragged, but unmistakably powerful even in weakness. A bowl of water sat near its paws, empty, but licked clean. The faint smell of stew lingered in the air. Nolan's heart jolted violently against his ribs. Every muscle in his body locked. For a split second, he wasn't a man standing in his garage. He was 12 years old again, pressed against the splintered fence of a neighbor's yard, screaming as a shepherd's jaws clamped down on his forearm. He felt the hot sting of teeth, the helpless panic, the sound of his own sobbing drowned out by snarls. Now, decades later, the memory returned with brutal clarity. The shepherd raised its head slowly, amber eyes catching the overhead bulb. They glowed like embers in the half-dark, steady assessing. No growl, no movement toward him, just watching. Nolan's pulse thundered. His hand went instinctively to the baton at his belt. "Dad?" The small voice came from behind him. He turned sharply to see June standing in the doorway, pajamas rumpled, inhaler clutched in her hand like a talisman. Her cheeks were flushed from nerves, but her chin lifted with stubborn resolve. "Emma June Hartley," Nolan said, his voice rough and sharp. "What is this doing here?" June flinched at the full weight of her name. Her lips trembled, but she forced the words out. "He was hurt, Daddy. Tomlin was chasing him with a broom. He was bleeding. I had to help." Nolan's eyes widened in disbelief. "Help? June, that's a full-grown shepherd. Do you have any idea?" His voice cracked with the memory he couldn't name. He took a step back, instinct screaming to put distance between himself and the dog. June stepped forward instead, small shoulders squared, inhaler rattling softly in her fist. "He's not like the others. He's good. He didn't bite. Not even when I touched his wounds." "June, don't be angry at her, Nolan." Evelyn's voice slid into the room like balm against the sharpness of his tone. She stood at the threshold, arms crossed, but eyes steady. The child saw a creature in pain and couldn't walk away. "Can you truly fault her for that?" Nolan raked a hand through his hair. Frustration etched deep into his face. "Ma, she risked her health. That money was for her inhaler, not for—" His hand cut through the air toward the dog, unable to finish the sentence. "Not for this." June's lower lip quivered. "It was only $5. I'll be okay." But he wouldn't have been. Her words pierced through him sharper than any reprimand could. Still, fear clenched in his gut. He couldn't erase the sight of those jaws, the memory of blood running hot down his arm. He didn't trust shepherds. He never had. The dog shifted then, a slow, deliberate movement. Nolan stiffened, every nerve screaming. But the shepherd did nothing threatening. Instead, he pushed himself upright with quiet dignity and walked, limped really, toward Nolan. June gasped softly, her small hand half lifted as if to stop him, but the shepherd ignored them both. He stopped just short of Nolan, close enough that the warmth of his body radiated through the air. Then, without sound, he lowered himself onto his haunches and sat at Nolan's feet. The gesture was so deliberate, so calm, that it knocked the breath from him. The dog's head bowed slightly, amber eyes lifted in quiet respect. Not submission, not fear, something older, steadier. Nolan swallowed hard. His hand twitched at his side, unsure whether to reach out or retreat. The scars on his arms seemed to burn, memories clashing with the reality before him. June's voice broke the silence, small but fierce. "See, Daddy? He's good. He knows you." Evelyn stepped closer, her voice low and steady. "Sometimes the past blinds us, Nolan. Not every shadow carries teeth." For a long moment, Nolan stood motionless, the ache of exhaustion battling the echo of old fear. The shepherd didn't move, didn't demand, just sat, waiting. Finally, Nolan let out a shaky breath and lowered his hand, not to touch, not yet, but to rest it on his thigh, inches from the shepherd's head, close enough that it was a choice to stay there. The shepherd's ears flicked once. His tail brushed the floor, a single, deliberate sweep. Nolan's throat tightened. He looked down at the dog, then at his daughter, whose eyes shimmered with hope. "This isn't permanent," he said gruffly, though the edge in his tone had dulled. "He stays in the garage. 3 days. After that, we find him somewhere else." June's face lit with relief. "Thank you, Daddy. You'll see. He's special." Nolan didn't answer. He turned, retreating into the house, but the image followed him. The shepherd sitting in quiet respect at his feet, amber eyes burning with a patience that felt too human, too knowing. And in the back of Nolan's mind, a thought he couldn't shake whispered against the walls of his fear. What if she's right? The house had grown quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed against the walls and made every creak of wood feel louder. Nolan sat at the edge of his bed, the lamplight throwing shadows across his tired face. His boots were still on, though he'd meant to take them off an hour ago. His mind churned, restless, circling back to the sight of the shepherd sitting so calmly at his feet in the garage. He had told himself it was temporary. 3 days. That was all. But the way June had looked at him, the way the dog had looked at him, it unsettled something deep inside, something he wasn't ready to name. Unable to sleep, Nolan pushed himself up and moved down the narrow hall. Evelyn's door was closed, and June's faint, steady breathing drifted out from her room. He paused there a moment, watching the sliver of light beneath her door, then turned away. The garage light glowed dimly through the crack at the bottom of the door. He hadn't remembered leaving it on, but June likely had. Nolan pulled the door open and stepped inside. The shepherd, Sable, June had called him, lifted his head immediately. Those amber eyes fixed on Nolan with quiet focus, as if the dog had been waiting. Nolan stopped just short of the quilt, keeping a cautious distance. His chest tightened, the old scars prickling along his arm. He should have turned back, should have left the animal to rest. But his gaze snagged on something beneath the dog's ragged coat, a faint metallic gleam that caught the bulb's light. Easy. Nolan murmured, his voice low, more for himself than the dog. He crouched slowly, knees creaking, keeping his movements deliberate. Sable didn't flinch. He simply shifted enough to allow Nolan closer, though his eyes never left the man's face. Nolan reached out, fingers brushing through the coarse fur. The touch sent a jolt of unease down his spine. He expected resistance, a growl, the snap of teeth. Instead, Sable held perfectly still, muscles taut but unthreatening. His fingers found the chain, tangled in the matted hair. He tugged gently, working it free. The metal was cool, worn smooth with time, edges dulled by years of wear. When it finally slid loose into his hand, Nolan's breath caught. It was a tag. He wiped it against his shirt, clearing the grime. The letters appeared slowly, each one striking like a hammer against his chest. Sable, K9. Unit. Nolan stared, the words swimming before his eyes. His heart pounded in his ears, but there was more. Below the bold line of the dog's name, faint and scratched, another engraving waited. He turned the tag, tilting it toward the light. His stomach lurched. Handler. Corporal Aaron Hartley. The room tilted. He gripped the tag so hard the edge bit into his palm. Aaron. His brother's name. Nolan staggered back, nearly losing his balance. Memories crashed into him in a torrent. Aaron's boyish grin, the way his laughter filled a room, the last argument they'd had before Aaron left for Afghanistan. He had begged his younger brother not to re-enlist, not to throw himself back into the fire. But Aaron had been stubborn, driven, always chasing purpose where Nolan saw only risk. And then the call had come. The ambush, the folded flag, the quiet condolences from strangers who couldn't possibly understand what had been lost. No body returned, no chance to say goodbye. Just absence, heavy and permanent. Nolan's throat closed, his knees bent, half in collapse, half in refusal to let go of the tag that now burned in his hand. This can't be, he whispered. Sable shifted closer, the faint brush of fur against Nolan's arm grounding him in the present. Those amber eyes watched him intently, as if they too carried memory, as if they knew the name on the tag before Nolan had read it. The dog lowered his head, resting it gently near Nolan's knee. Not a demand, not a plea, just presence. Steady, quiet, waiting. Nolan's vision blurred, his grip loosened, the tag clinking softly against the concrete. Aaron's partner, Aaron's dog. The thought sliced through him with both agony and awe. Had this animal truly stood beside his brother in that foreign desert? Had these same eyes seen the last moments of Aaron's life? Nolan pressed his palms to his face, trembling. The years of grief he had packed away, the guilt of words left unsaid, of distance never bridged. It all pressed against him now with unbearable weight. His voice cracked, raw and disbelieving. That's impossible. The words hung in the cold air, a cliff edge between denial and the truth that loomed like a storm beyond the horizon. And in the silence that followed, Sable remained at his side, unwavering, as though he had been sent across oceans and years to carry something back. A fragment of Aaron, a living piece of the past, returned against all reason. Sleep didn't come easily for Nolan that night. He lay stretched across his bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it hummed in slow, lazy circles, his fingers still aching from how tightly he had clutched the metal tag. Every time he closed his eyes, Aaron's name burned behind his eyelids, Corporal Aaron Hartley, his brother, gone 3 years. And yet, here was his dog, breathing under the same roof, amber eyes carrying secrets across oceans. The memories began to stir uninvited, tugging him back through years that felt both distant and painfully close. They were boys again, barefoot in the tall summer grass behind their father's farmhouse. Nolan was 12, Aaron 9, and the world was theirs to conquer. The whistle code had been Nolan's idea, a secret signal only the two of them shared. 2 short bursts meant hide now. A long, rising whistle meant a circle back. When their father's stern voice bellowed from the porch at dusk, one sharp whistle from Nolan meant time to come home before trouble finds us. Aaron had adored it, practicing until he could mimic the exact pitch. Sometimes he'd use it to trick Nolan, whistling from the barn roof while Nolan scoured the cornfields, only to leap out and tackle him in a heap of laughter. Rivalry was constant between them, but it was the kind born not of malice, but of brothers who couldn't bear to be apart. Their father, John Hartley, had little patience for such antics. A man carved from stone, with hands hardened by decades at the mill, he ruled the house with rules as rigid as fence posts. "Discipline makes men," he'd bark whenever he caught them scrapping. "Play is for the weak." Yet Aaron had a way of softening even their father's bark. With his quick smile and fearless spirit, he pushed boundaries Nolan never dared. Once, when their father ordered them to chop wood until sunset, Aaron whistled the circle-back code, slipping Nolan a grin before darting off to the creek. Nolan had hesitated, axe heavy in his hands. But hearing his brother's distant laugh carried on the breeze, he'd followed anyway, catching a fish with his bare hands while Aaron cheered. For those hours, under the weight of their secret code, they weren't just sons of a stern father. They were free. But not every memory was bathed in golden light. One autumn afternoon, Nolan had been tasked with delivering eggs to a neighbor. Their dog, an old shepherd mix named Rex, had always been skittish, but Nolan had thought nothing of it. He had reached out, hand extended with boyish trust. In an instant, the dog lunged, jaws clamping around his forearm. Nolan remembered the hot shock of pain, the scream that tore from his throat, the frantic scramble to break free. The bite left jagged scars that still marred his skin, but worse, it carved something deeper, fear. From then on, every bark set his heart racing. Every glimpse of sharp teeth reminded him of that helpless terror. He never forgave dogs, never trusted their silence, never believed in their loyalty again. Aaron was different. Where Nolan's fear hardened into avoidance, Aaron's fascination deepened. He would sit for hours, sketching dogs in the margins of his school notebooks. When the neighbor's farmhand brought over a pup, Aaron knelt down without hesitation, letting the animal lick his cheek, while Nolan stood stiff and pale several steps back. "You just gotta show them you're not afraid," Aaron had said once, wiping slobber from his chin. "They can feel it. They know." Nolan had scoffed, cradling his scarred arm. Or maybe they just bite whoever's dumb enough to trust them. Aaron had only smiled that unshakable smile. Not all of them. That difference in them grew as they aged. Nolan followed structure, order, the badge and uniform that offered rules he could trust. Aaron followed instinct and heart, enlisting young, gravitating toward the canine unit as if it had always been waiting for him. When Aaron wrote home from training, his letters were filled with descriptions of his dog, his partner, his brother-in-arms. Nolan hadn't understood it then. How could he? To him, a dog was a reminder of blood on his arm and the helpless scream he'd never forgotten. But for Aaron, It was salvation, a kind of bond Nolan couldn't touch. Now, in the quiet of his darkened room, Nolan pressed a palm against his forearm, feeling the faint ridges of the scars, even after all these years. His brother had chosen to run toward what Nolan had run from, and Aaron had paid the price. The whistle code echoed faintly in his ears, memory pulling him back to those fields. 2 sharp bursts. Hide now. The sound was so vivid, he half expected to hear Aaron's laugh follow, but silence pressed heavily around him. Nolan turned the tag over in his hand again, fingers brushing the engraving until the letters blurred with the heat of his grip. Sable, K9 Unit. Handler, Corporal Aaron Hartley. A child's scar, a brother's stubborn heart. A secret code only they had shared. And now this dog, carrying Aaron's name like a ghost, is stitched into steel. Nolan let out a shuddering breath, the words slipping into the dark, like confession. Aaron, what did you send me? Dawn bled into the kitchen by degrees, turning the window over the sink into a pale square of winter light. The house made soft old house sounds, pipes ticking, floorboards sighing, as if it were waking reluctantly. Evelyn moved the way women do who have done mornings for a lifetime. Kettle on, mugs ready, the quiet laid out like a tablecloth. Nolan came in barefoot, shirt half-buttoned, eyes bruised with a night that hadn't yielded sleep. He carried the tag without meaning to, thumb rubbing the worn metal in his pocket as though it were a worry stone. When he stopped near the counter, the scent of coffee steadied him just enough to take a breath that didn't feel like breaking. "You're up early," Evelyn said, turning down the flame. Her voice had the gentleness of blankets warmed by the stove. "Never went down," he said. She studied him, her son, finally taller than the grief that had once bent him, but not free of it. The lines at the corners of his mouth had deepened since the flood, and there was that stubborn set to his jaw that came out whenever life asked him to trust what he couldn't prove. "Sit," she said, not a request. He sat. The chair creaked as if remembering him from other hard mornings. Through the half-open door at the end of the hall came the whisper of a small child's sleep. June breathed evenly, the kind of deep, untroubled rhythm Nolan had counted like prayer when she was a baby. Evelyn set a mug in front of him and took her own seat opposite. Between them, the table's oak surface held a scatter of small domestic relics. Salt cellar, a dish of keys, the silver locket she wore tied with a length of blue ribbon when the clasp gave out last spring. The pendant lay open, as if even it needed air. On one side, Nolan and Aaron barefoot in the creek, boys with summer on their faces. On the other, June's school photo, one front tooth missing, her grin a dare against the world. "Tell me," Evelyn said. Nolan swallowed. He took the tag from his pocket and set it down with care that bordered on reverence. The metal clicked against wood, a quiet sound that still seemed to ring. She tilted it toward the window, let the light find the letters. Sable, K9 Unit. And beneath, the faint, stubborn line of truth. Handler, Corporal Aaron Hartley. For a long breath, neither of them spoke. Outside, a crow flung its voice into the cold and got nothing back but the plainness of morning. "Maybe," Evelyn said at last, "Aaron found a way to send him back to us." Nolan's head came up, the old reflexive no flaring in his eyes. "Dogs don't cross continents," he said. The words were flat, almost harsh against the quiet. "They don't walk out of war and turn up in our garage 3 years later because someone wishes it." Evelyn didn't flinch. She had weathered harder winds than his doubt. "And yet," she said, tapping the tag with a finger that had rocked both her boys to sleep once, "here we are, with what we have. Names don't carve themselves." He pushed away from the table and stood, needing movement to keep from unraveling. The kitchen window showed a thin frost on the lawn. The Hartley mailbox, leaning to one side like it too, was tired of standing. He could see the garage from here, the high window, the chain sway of the pull cord, could see, if he let himself, the shape of a shepherd's head lifting the instant the door opened. "You didn't see him when he bit me," Nolan said. And though he meant the neighbor's dog all those years ago, meant the pain and the blood and the way fear had taken up residence in his bones, he heard how small the defense sounded in a kitchen where his mother's locket lay open to the past. "You didn't feel. I saw you afterward," she said, soft but steady. "I changed the bandages. I watched the way you watched doorways for years. I know what it took from you." Her eyes were the color of the river in late autumn, clear, cold, unafraid. "And I know what Aaron gave himself to. Both things can be true." He scrubbed a hand over his face. The badge on the chair back gleamed dull brass. The weight of it had always been measurable. He could count shifts, citations, miles on patrol. Grief was not like that. It had its own rulers. "You think I don't want to believe," he whispered. "You think I haven't spent nights bargaining with a god I don't know how to talk to. But this—" He lifted his hands and let them fall. "This is too much like a story June would tell herself when the world scares her." Evelyn's mouth curved, something like sorrow, something like love. "Stories are how children hold on," she said, "and how grown men find their way back." He laughed once, without humor. "You want me to accept that Aaron sent a dog? I want you to accept that love leaves roots we can't map." She reached for the tag, cradled it in her palm as if it were warm. "Your brother followed dogs because he trusted what you didn't. He wrote me from training, you remember? They don't lie, Ma. They don't pretend they aren't afraid. They just keep going." Nolan did remember. He remembered that line word for word, because he'd read it and felt anger flare. At the war, at Aaron's certainty, at the way a dog had been allowed where Nolan could not follow, into the fiercest part of his brother's heart. Even if Sable. He had to say the name carefully, as if it had edges. Even if he is who this says he is. What does that make him now? Evidence? A souvenir? A ghost we feed stew to? Evelyn's smile was small and unsentimental. "A gift," she said. "A hard one, maybe. Not wrapped the way you would choose. But still a gift." He sank back into the chair, as if the word itself had weight. A gift. He thought of June's voice in the garage, the way it had threaded through the dog's pain like a needle drawing two pieces of cloth together. "You're safe now." He had wanted to correct her. Unsafe, unpredictable, temporary. But the dog had looked at the child and then at Nolan, as if any safety that could be made here would be made between the three of them, or not at all. "June spent her emergency money," he said, thinking of the $5 bill he'd pressed into that small palm, with the old, tired refrain, "just in case." "She made a choice I told her she doesn't get to make." "And you," Evelyn said, "made a choice last night when you didn't send him away." Her hand, lined and sure, brushed the locket open to the boys at the creek. "We are all making choices inside the ache. It's what families do." Silence unfurled. Not empty, but expectant. The kettle hissed softly, as if to say, the simplest things go on, no matter who is missing. Nolan reached out. His fingers hovered a beat above the tag, then closed over it again. The metal felt cooler now, as if it had given up some of its heat to the room. He turned it, memorizing the faint scratches where time had tried to erase what it couldn't. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Not with a dog. Not with Aaron's name here, like a door I can't open and can't walk away from." Evelyn's answer was the mercy of plain speech. You start where you are. You feed the living thing that's been placed in your care. You let it lie on the quilt. You watch. You see what truth arrives when you stop arguing with the form it took. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the years tucked into the corners of her eyes, saw the way her hands, stiff in the mornings now, still wrapped around a mug like prayer. He had forgotten sometimes that grief had made a room in her too, and that she'd kept setting the table anyway. "What if he's dangerous?" Nolan asked, though the dog's quiet from the night had already carved doubt into that question. "Then we will know it," she said. "But what if he's the opposite of dangerous? What if he is the way through?" She lifted the locket, let it swing once on the blue ribbon, catching the light. 2 boys, 1 girl, all the lives that tethered them. What if this is Aaron's last good thing? Something unspooled in Nolan's chest. Not belief, not yet, but the loosening that precedes it. He closed his hand around the tag until he could feel the letters press into his skin. Sable. Aaron. "I can promise 3 days," he said finally, voice rough. "Food? Water. The garage." Evelyn nodded, as if he'd offered her a season. 3 days is how all forever begins. They sat with it. The house breathed. From the hall, June turned in her sleep and murmured. And as if answering the smallest of summonses, a soft scrape sounded from the garage. Claws repositioning on quilt. The hush of a body deciding to rest again. Nolan's gaze went to the door, then back to his mother. "If he stays," he said, and the word did its own work on him, "it won't be because I chose sentiment over sense." "No," Evelyn said. "It will be because you chose courage over fear." He let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. Outside, the thin light strengthened. Day, indifferent to mysteries, opened its hands. Nolan rose, slipped the tag into his pocket, and stood for a long moment with his palm pressed there. Over metal, over name, over a boyhood that still knew 2 short whistles meant hide now, and 1 long call meant come home. "Maybe," he said, and that was as close to surrender as he could get. "Maybe." Evelyn reached across the table and closed the locket with a soft click, the sound of a door that didn't lock behind you. "Finish your coffee," she said, "then go see the gift." He did as he was told, for once grateful to be a son. The Saturday afternoon sunlight filtered through the garage windows in fractured beams, glinting off old paint cans, Nolan's battered toolbox, and the neat rows of mason jars Evelyn used to store nails and screws. Dust hung in the light like a secret. The scent of motor oil and old wood mingled with something newer, the faint musk of dog, warm and alive. June sat cross-legged on the old quilt that served as Sable's bed, her braids fraying at the ends, freckles standing out like constellations across her pale skin. A plastic tea set was arranged carefully before her. She poured invisible tea into tiny cups and slid one toward the shepherd's great paws. "You're the guest of honor," she whispered. Sable didn't move at first, only watched her with those amber eyes that seemed far older than his battered body. Then, with a deliberate grace, he lowered his head and gave the cup a single, respectful sniff. June giggled, the sound light and unguarded, the way only children could laugh in a world that still frightened them sometimes. "You're polite," she said, patting his chest. "Not like the chickens at Mr. Griggs's farm. They don't know how to play tea party." From the doorway, Nolan leaned on the frame, arms folded. He told himself he'd only stopped to check on his daughter. But the truth was, something in him wanted to see this with his own eyes. The child who had lost her mother too soon, and the dog who had walked out of nowhere carrying Nolan's brother's name carved into metal. June shifted the game. She stood up and clasped her hands behind her back, imitating the way she had once seen her father stand when giving directions to his fellow officers. "Sit," she said, voice lilting, almost playful. Sable obeyed instantly. Nolan straightened, blinking. June giggled again, oblivious to the weight of what had just happened. "Good boy." She clapped, her hands small against the cavernous quiet of the garage. Then she tried another. She lifted one hand, palm open and flat at shoulder height. She had seen it once when Nolan directed traffic in the rain outside the school. "Stop," she chirped. Sable's body shifted. In one smooth, practiced movement, the shepherd froze, back straight, ears forward, eyes locked on her with perfect, unwavering focus. The air seemed to change, charged, electric, as though the animal had just stepped out of a memory too sharp for the moment. June tilted her head. "That's funny. You listen better than Daddy." But Nolan wasn't laughing. His breath caught. He recognized that gesture, not from traffic duty, but from hours of drills he'd watched Aaron perform with his K-9 unit during leave. He remembered how Aaron used to joke, "These dogs don't just listen, Nolan. They read you. They're soldiers with fur." "June," Nolan said carefully, his voice lower now, the cop in him rising unbidden. "Do that again." She frowned, unsure if she was in trouble, but she raised her small hand once more. Palm out. Sable locked into position again, unflinching. His body was carved from instinct, his amber eyes burning with expectation, waiting, ready for the next order that would not come. Nolan stepped into the garage. His boots scuffed against the concrete, and for an instant he thought the shepherd might turn, might break formation. But Sable remained statuesque, the quiet hum of obedience radiating off him. "That's no stray," Nolan whispered, the words pulled from somewhere between awe and dread. June looked at her father, then back at the dog, confused. "But he's ours now, right? I saved him." Nolan crouched slowly, careful not to break the taut line of energy vibrating in the shepherd's stance. His heart pounded. He'd spent years burying the idea that anything of Aaron's could come back, that any fragment of his brother might ever again inhabit the living world. But here, inches away, was a dog answering to an invisible language, trained beyond the reach of backyard strays and farm mutts. "Down," Nolan said, his voice testing, unfamiliar with the command. Sable hesitated, only for a heartbeat, then lowered himself to the quilt with military precision, front legs aligned, head up, waiting. June clapped her hands again. "See, Daddy? He likes to play." But Nolan wasn't smiling. His eyes stung as he reached forward, fingertips brushing the chain half hidden in Sable's fur. The tag glinted faintly in the dim light. Sable, K-9 unit. Handler, Corporal Aaron Hartley. Every scar on the shepherd's body seemed to whisper the truth. This was no accident. No chance of a stray found under a junk table. This was discipline carved into bone, obedience etched into muscle memory. Sable shifted his gaze then, breaking formation not for command but for choice. He looked at Nolan, directly, deeply, his amber eyes burning with something between loyalty and recognition. Nolan exhaled shakily, his throat tightening. "Aaron," he murmured under his breath, though June couldn't hear. "What have you done?" For a long moment the three of them stayed like that. The child with her games, the father torn between fear and revelation, and the shepherd who carried secrets older than his wounds. Evelyn's voice floated from the kitchen, calling June in for supper. The spell fractured. June skipped off, leaving her teacups rattling in her wake. Nolan remained in the garage, crouched low, staring at the soldier dog who had crossed oceans to sit here in their silence. Sable didn't move. He didn't need to. His stillness spoke louder than any bark. And in Nolan's chest, the old grief twisted into something new, a dangerous, undeniable hope. June eased the garage door open just wide enough to slip through. The bare bulb overhead hummed faintly, casting a yellow pool of light across the oil-stained floor. Sable was there, pacing tight circles by the far wall, his claws clicking on the concrete. He stopped when he saw her, ears lifting, amber eyes catching the light. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" she whispered, crouching low. She spread the old quilt they kept for him and curled up beside it, inhaler clutched tight in her small hand. The shepherd nosed at her pocket, then settled with a low sigh, his flank warm against her shoulder. For a while she listened to his breathing, steady and deep, and thought maybe she'd been silly. Maybe the whispers at school were just words. Maybe the sheriff's car just happened to pass. Her eyelids drooped. Then Sable stiffened. His head lifted sharply, ears straining toward the night. A low growl vibrated in his chest, so soft June felt it more than heard it. She held her breath, her small hand frozen on his fur. Outside, past the garage door, something shifted in the dark. Gravel crunched once, then went silent. June's heart thudded. She pressed close to the shepherd's side, her whisper no louder than the tick of the cooling engine. "What is it, boy?" Sable didn't move, didn't blink. He only stared at the door, every muscle carved with warning, as the hush outside thickened into something alive. Inside, the dark shape of the German shepherd lifted his head instantly. Even in shadow, his amber eyes gleamed with quiet alertness. When he recognized her, Sable rose stiffly, tail brushing once against the concrete floor. "Hi, boy," June whispered, closing the door behind her. She knelt on the blanket spread across the corner and wrapped her arms around his thick neck. The warmth of his fur steadied her, a living shield against the unease that had settled over their family. "I couldn't sleep." Sable licked her cheek once, then stilled, his ears flicking forward. His muscles tightened beneath her small hands. A low growl began to rumble deep in his chest, so soft at first that June thought she'd imagined it. But then it grew, vibrating against her ribs. "What is it?" she asked, following his gaze. The dog's eyes fixed on the narrow garage window. June turned her head slowly, her heart hammering. Beyond the glass, across the darkened street, sat a vehicle, black, its windows tinted, its engine a faint, steady purr. She pressed closer to Sable, her breath catching. It was the third night in a row. Always parked in the same spot, always idling like it had nowhere else to be. For a moment, she tried to tell herself it was nothing. A neighbor's visitor, someone lost, a coincidence. But the way Sable's hackles bristled, the way his growl sharpened into something primal, erased any hope of that. The SUV's headlights flared briefly, then clicked off again, as if whoever was inside had just adjusted their position. watching, waiting. June's throat tightened. She buried her face into Sable's fur, whispering so softly she barely heard herself. "Who's watching us?" The shepherd's growl faded into silence, replaced by a steady, protective stillness. He stood between her and the window, his body a wall of muscle and resolve. For long minutes, the two of them sat there, the child and the dog, bound together by fear and something deeper. Finally, with a faint hiss of tires on wet pavement, the SUV rolled slowly down the street and vanished into the night. Only then did Sable relax, lowering himself back onto the blanket with a sigh. June lay curled beside him, her small hand clutching his collar, her eyelids heavy at last. The grown-ups didn't believe the whispers, the rumors, or the strange car on the road. But she knew better. And Sable, he knew too. The drive to Riverbend blurred past Nolan. His grip on the wheel was white-knuckled, his jaw locked. Beside him, Sable sat upright in the passenger seat, alert, steady, every inch the soldier Aaron's dog had once been. That knowledge weighed heavier the closer they drew to the Veterans Center. Nolan had delayed this trip, afraid of what he might uncover. But the SUV sightings, Griggs's threats, Evelyn's quiet push, "You'll never know if you keep running," had left him no choice. The brick building loomed with faded flags out front. For those who served, for those who carry the weight still, read the bronze plaque. Sable leapt down gracefully, trotting a step ahead before pausing, waiting for Nolan. Inside, the receptionist smiled kindly, her gaze lingering on the shepherd. "Good morning, officer." "I'm looking for Major Collins," Nolan said. "Tell him it's Nolan Hartley, about a K9. The word sergeant, when she repeated it back, struck deep. He hadn't worn that rank in years. When Collins finally appeared, tall and silver-haired, the handshake was firm but heavy with history. His eyes landed on Sable and froze. "My God," he whispered, crouching slightly. "I never thought I'd see this dog again." In Collins's office, the truth unfolded. The scanner beeped, confirming what Nolan already feared. Unit designation K914, call name Sable. Handler, Corporal Aaron Hartley. Status, presumed killed in action, 2019. Nolan's chest tightened. So it's true. He was Aaron's partner. He survived. Collins nodded, his voice heavy with grief and awe. Not just survived. He was exceptional. Explosives, electronics, human scent. They considered rewriting training protocols around him. Then the ambush. Aaron died, and Sable vanished. "Missing," Nolan said bitterly. "Unofficially," Collins murmured. "I always hoped. But seeing him here, it feels like more than a chance." Nolan's hand brushed Sable's fur, the shepherd leaning into the touch. Memories surged. Aaron's grin. Promises broken by folded flags. "How does a war dog end up in Riverton?" Nolan asked. Collins's face hardened. Whispers. Private contractors. Black programs. Sable wasn't just a dog. He was living technology, worth millions. Rumor was, he was captured, studied, retrained. But dogs aren't machines. You can't replicate loyalty. And Sable, he was one of a kind. Silence pressed heavy. Collins's voice dropped. "If he escaped, they'll come for him. And if you've noticed shadows, strange vehicles, they're already close." Nolan thought of the SUV parked near his house. His stomach sank. "They're not taking him," he said quietly. Collins studied him, recognizing Aaron's stubborn fire. "Then be ready. The kind of men who'd steal a war dog Don't knock politely. Sable's gaze locked on Nolan, unwavering. In that moment, the bond between them sealed. Grief forged into loyalty, sharpened into resolve. The drive back was drowned in silence. Fields blurred past, the horizon bleeding dusk. Nolan's chest burned with Collins's warning. If they're watching, they'll come. But deeper still lay guilt, sharper than fear. He pulled onto the gravel shoulder, killing the engine. For a long moment, he leaned against the wheel, breathing hard. "I should have looked for you," he muttered. "After Aaron, I should have tried." His fist slammed against the steering wheel. "Instead, I believed the lies. I buried hope because it was easier than hurting." His throat tightened. He turned toward the shepherd. "You were his partner, his brother, and I let you rot. God knows what they did to you. Yet, you still found your way back." His fingers brushed the worn tag. Handler, Corporal Aaron Hartley. Memories cut deep. Aaron's laugh, his last call, promises never kept. "I failed him," Nolan whispered. "And I failed you." Sable moved, resting his head firmly on Nolan's lap. Amber eyes met his, steady, forgiving. No reproach, just presence. The dam broke. Nolan's tears fell hot onto Sable's fur. Years of grief and anger poured out, witnessed only by the shepherd. "Maybe Evelyn's right," he whispered hoarsely. "Maybe Aaron sent you back. Maybe you're the second chance I don't deserve." The dog sighed, eyes closing, head pressed against him like an anchor. Nolan's voice softened. "I can't promise perfection, but I won't fail you again. Or June. Or Aaron. Not this time." Sable's tail thumped once. Nolan laughed, broken but real. Headlights pierced the twilight as he started the truck again. Ahead stretched a long road, uncertain, dangerous, but for the first time, it felt less like a burden and more like a path. And beside him, Sable sat steady and sure, a living reminder that though the past could not be rewritten, the present still held a chance to make things right. The knock on the front door wasn't polite. It rattled the frame, sharp and demanding. June flinched at the kitchen table, her pencil snapping mid-doodle. Evelyn, hands buried in dough, looked up at Nolan. His jaw was already tight. He knew who it was. He swung the door open. Albert Griggs stood there, red-faced and puffed up like a rooster, muddy boots grinding against the porch boards. In one hand, he held a folded document. In the other, he rested a shotgun like it was a badge of authority. "You hiding behind your badge, Wells?" Griggs sneered. "Not today. Judge Harmon signed this." He shoved the paper at Nolan's chest. "That mutt of yours is ordered off Riverton property by sundown tomorrow." Down the hall, June clutched her inhaler, half hidden in the shadows. On the couch, Sable rose silently to his feet. No bark, no growl, just a steady, watchful stare that made Griggs falter, if only for a heartbeat. Nolan scanned the document. County seal, Harmon's looping signature. The words hit hard. Animal deemed a danger to public safety. Ordered removed by 6:00 p.m. tomorrow. His stomach twisted. This wasn't a rumor anymore. This was law. Gravel crunched outside. Sheriff Donovan's cruiser rolled up, the man himself stepping out, eyes flicking between farmer, cop, and dog. "Donovan, Nolan said, voice low. You signed off on this circus? The sheriff's shoulders sagged. It wasn't my choice. Griggs filed complaints, brought pictures of dead hens, stirred up the council. Harmon issued the order this morning. By law, I've got to enforce it. By law, Nolan repeated bitterly. You know damn well Sable's no chicken killer. I know. Donovan rubbed the back of his neck. But Harmon doesn't care what I know. Folks get scared easy. Griggs smirked. Scared for good reason. That beast'll turn on the girl next. You want that on your conscience, Sheriff? The words barely left his mouth before Sable stepped forward, placing himself between June and the farmer. June's small fingers dug into her inhaler. Nolan's hand went to her shoulder. His voice was ice. Talk about my daughter again, and you won't need a removal order to keep you off my porch. Donovan raised a hand, cutting off the rising heat. Enough. The order's legal, Nolan. By sundown tomorrow, Sable has to be gone. If not, he hesitated. I'll have no choice but to act. The silence was suffocating. Evelyn appeared in the doorway, flour dusting her apron. Sheriff, you know this isn't right. That dog saved June last week. He hasn't hurt a soul. I know, Donovan said softly. But right and lawful aren't always the same thing. June's small voice trembled but carried clear. Sable's not dangerous. He's family. He keeps me safe. That pierced deeper than any legal order. Donovan's eyes softened, but he said nothing. Nolan folded the paper with deliberate care, pocketing it. Message delivered, Griggs. Now get off my property. The farmer spat in the dirt but backed away, shotgun glinting as he climbed into his truck. Donovan lingered, voice low. I'll buy you as much time as I can, but Harmon's order is official. If Sable's still here after sundown, it won't just be Griggs at your door. I'll handle it, Nolan said, but inside, the ground was shifting beneath him. When the sheriff drove off, the house felt too quiet. June buried her face in Sable's fur, Evelyn's weary eyes on Nolan. This isn't just about chickens, she whispered. There are bigger hands pushing this. You know it. Nolan rubbed his temple, looking down at the shepherd's steady gaze. The words slipped out, half prayer. They're not taking you. Not while I'm still breathing. Night pressed heavy over the Hartley house. Evelyn slept. June curled tight under her blanket. Inhaler clutched even in dreams. Nolan sat at the kitchen table, pistol disassembled before him. Not for cleaning, but as distraction. The folded order burned in his pocket. Sundown tomorrow. Then he heard it. Whispers. Low, urgent. Just outside the garage. Every nerve snapped taut. He grabbed the old Louisville Slugger by the door, its wood worn smooth. Sable was already moving, silent and low, ears pricked, eyes burning. Nolan eased out into the yard. The air smelled of damp earth and gasoline. Voices sharpened near the garage. Should be right here. Check under the blankets. If the tracker's still hot, tracker. Through the crack, Nolan glimpsed two masked men rifling through the quilt in the corner. One held a device glowing faint green. Something broke inside him. Strangers. His garage. His brother's dog. He didn't wait. He kicked the door open, bat swinging. Wood cracked against ribs. One man gasped, staggering. The other lunged for a weapon, but Sable launched like lightning, teeth sinking into his arm, dragging him down. The device clattered across the concrete. "Drop it!" Nolan roared. But the first man was already dragging his partner toward the door. Nolan barked a command. "Stay!" And Sable froze. trembling with restrained fury. The intruders bolted into the night, their footsteps fading into the dark. Only Nolan's harsh breaths and Sable's growl remained. He stooped, scooping up the device. Small, black, sleek. Its light blinked steady. They'd been tracking Sable. "Damn it," Nolan muttered. "Daddy?" His heart lurched. June stood in the doorway, nightgown fluttering, inhaler trembling in her grip. Who were they? Nolan forced calm, crouching to her level. "It's okay, Junebug. They're gone." Her gaze flicked to Sable, standing like a sentinel, then to the device. They were looking for him. He pulled her close. "Yeah, they were." Evelyn's voice drifted from the hall, shaken. "Nolan?" He rose, daughter in his arms, eyes meeting Sable's across the garage. The shepherd's amber stare was unflinching. The shadows are real. And the night hadn't settled when headlights split the dark. A black SUV tore down the road, stopping hard by the porch. Nolan's grip tightened on the bat, the tracker device still in his fist. Sable bristled at his side. The driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out, civilian clothes, but a soldier's bearing. Hands raised in a silent pledge. "Sergeant Hartley," he called, voice steady. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Nolan froze. Hartley. The name from another life. "Who the hell are you?" The man stepped into the porch light. Salt and pepper hair, eyes sharp from battlefields. "Captain James Shepard, United States Army. I was your brother's commanding officer." The bat wavered in Nolan's grip. "Aaron's CO. You served with Aaron?" Shepard nodded. "More than served. I was there the day he..." He stopped, jaw tight. His gaze dropped to Sable, whose ears pricked in recognition, body taut with memory. Before Nolan could speak, flashing red and blue cut the night. Sheriff Donovan's cruiser rolled up behind the SUV. The sheriff stepped out, hand near his holster. "What in God's name is going on?" Donovan barked. "Sheriff?" Shepard said evenly. "Captain James Shepard, retired. I'm here for the dog." Donovan's eyes narrowed. "Middle of the night, after a break-in call. You can see how that looks, Captain." "I'm not with those men," Shepard replied. "I've been tracking them. Contractors. Dangerous ones. They're after what that dog carries. Training that shouldn't be in the wrong hands." "Contractors?" Donovan pressed. "Then why's the Army sniffing around Oak Ridge for a shepherd missing 3 years?" Tension coiled tighter. Nolan finally spoke, voice rough. "You knew, Sheriff. You knew who Sable was." Donovan hesitated, then admitted, "I suspected. But suspicion wasn't enough to drag your family into classified mud. I was trying to protect you." "Protect June. By keeping me in the dark," Nolan snapped. He turned on Shepard. "And you storm into my yard like you own him. He's not property. He's my brother's dog. He's family." Shepard's eyes softened, just a flicker. "You think I don't know that? Aaron made me promise. If anything happened, the dog goes to you. But promises don't mean much when millions of dollars worth of training is on 4 legs. Nolan's chest heaved, rage and grief colliding. But before he could answer, Sable moved. Quiet, steady. He stepped forward and sat at Nolan's boots. His amber gaze lifted, meeting Nolan's, then Shepard's. A silent choice. The standoff cracked. Donovan exhaled, weary. "Enough, no more shadows. We're going inside. All of us, before this town turns into a battlefield." Shepard gave a curt nod. Nolan didn't lower the bat, but his shoulders sagged, exhaustion and years of buried grief pressing down. He looked at Sable, at the SUV, at the flashing blue lights staining the garage walls. Aaron's war wasn't finished. It had just shifted fronts. And now it was here, on Nolan's doorstep. The storm rolled into Riverton with the weight of something biblical. Rain slammed rooftops, gutters overflowed, gravel roads turned to rivers of mud. Lightning forked across the sky, thunder rattling the Hartley windows. Inside, Evelyn clutched her rosary, whispering prayers. Nolan paced, checking his watch, then the backyard. June had begged to camp with her friend Sarah despite his warnings. He'd relented. Now the tent sagged under rain, and the yard was empty. "June!" His voice tore the night as he ripped the tent open. Empty. Sleeping bags soaked, flashlights rolling in puddles. A hollowness opened in his chest. "Sable!" The shepherd was already moving, hackles raised, nose to the storm. He bounded to the fence where two sets of small footprints led toward the creek. "God, no!" Nolan sprinted back to the porch. "They're gone, toward the water." "Call Donovan," he shouted to Evelyn, then dove into his cruiser. Sable leapt in beside him, soaked but steady, amber eyes locked ahead. The radio crackled. "Hartley, hold your position. Creek's 3 feet over. We'll do grid search." But Nolan was already on the move. Memories of the last flood seared him. The bodies, the wailing children. He would not add June's voice to them. Headlights cut the rain. Donovan's cruiser skidded to a stop with 2 deputies behind. Orders flew. "Check the south bank. Every hollow, every root." Sable leapt from the truck, nose to mud, pulling like a soldier on mission. "He's got them!" Nolan shouted, chasing after the dark shapes slicing through the storm. The shepherd barked once, sharp, then plunged into the brush. Nolan's flashlight beam caught a sodden shoe lodged in a tree root above the raging creek. His stomach dropped. Too close. The storm's roar deepened as they rounded a bend. And then, Nolan saw it. An old children's fort, half-rotted, perched in a leaning oak over the torrent. 2 small figures clung to it, hair plastered, faces pale. "Daddy!" June's scream ripped the night. "Hold on!" Nolan bellowed, frantic for a way across. The creek was a monster. No man could cross it alive. Sable didn't wait. With a guttural bark, he hurled himself into the water. The current swallowed him, but moments later he surfaced, fighting forward with brutal strength. Lightning froze the scene in white. 2 children clinging to a collapsing fort, and a battered shepherd forcing his way to them. Boards snapped. Sarah screamed. Sable clawed onto the oak, dragging himself upward until his head was level with the girls. He barked, commanding, urging them closer. June's hands found his fur. Sarah buried her face in his neck. The dog braced himself, body an anchor against wind and rain. "Grab him!" Nolan shouted. "Hold on to Sable." The shepherd nudged, tugged, coaxed, inch by inch guiding them toward the trunk. June slipped. His jaws caught her jacket, steadying her. With one final shove, he pressed her down to the lowest branch. Nolan lunged, hauling her into his arms. Relief split through him like lightning. Sarah came next, Sable pressing beneath her legs until Nolan caught her too. Both girls safe, sobbing, alive. But when he looked back, Sable was gone. The fort gave a final groan and collapsed into the torrent. Dark fur vanished with the wreckage. "No!" Nolan roared, shoving the girls into a deputy's arms. He sprinted toward the footbridge ahead, just as it shuddered under the flood. The supports snapped. Boards splintered. He threw himself forward as the bridge collapsed, plunging into the icy water. The current seized him like a fist. It spun him, slammed him under, knives of cold cutting into his chest. He surfaced, gasping, and saw him. Sable, thrashing against the flood, dragged toward a tangle of branches. His ears pinned, his mouth barely above water. But even then, his eyes found Nolan. Amber. Fierce. Alive. Fear gripped Nolan. Floodwaters, drowning, dogs, all his buried scars at once. And he chose. No more, he rasped, forcing his body through the torrent. I won't fail you. Not Aaron. Not you. The current battered him into a log, pain exploding in his ribs. He clawed forward, lungs burning, memories of Aaron's laugh and June's trust driving him on. Sable yelped as the branches dragged him under. Nolan lunged, hand closing on the slick collar. Got you! The current tore at them, but he locked on, refusing to let go. Together they vanished under, bodies thrashing in sync, man and dog against the flood. He surfaced again, gasping, dragging Sable with him. Deputies shouted from shore, ropes flying. Nolan snatched one line, the other arm crushing Sable to his chest. Pull! He roared. The rope went taut, dragging them inch by brutal inch. His boots scraped mud at last. Deputies hauled them onto the bank, collapsing in a heap of water and breath. For a long moment, there was only thunder and rain, and two survivors breathing as one. Nolan rolled to his side, hands sinking into soaked fur. His voice broke. I won't fail you or Aaron again. Not ever. Sable's amber eyes met his, and his tail thumped once against the mud. It was enough. The fluorescent lights of Riverbend Veterinary Clinic hummed against the storm outside, too calm for the chaos tearing through Nolan's chest. He burst through the doors, soaked to the bone, Sable's limp body draped across his arms. The shepherd's chest rose in shallow, uneven jerks. Water dripped from his fur, pooling on the tiles with every desperate step. Help! Nolan's voice cracked. Somebody help him! Dr. Mira Reeves appeared from the back, pulling on gloves as she ran. Bring him in here, she barked, pushing open the surgical suite. Nolan laid Sable on the stainless steel table, his hands trembling. The dog looked smaller under the harsh lights, his fur plastered flat, ribs sharp against his soaked skin. Hypothermia, Mira muttered, sensors already clicking into place. Pulse weak, lungs full. We need to move fast. A breathing tube slid into place, oxygen hissing as Rosa, the tech, wheeled over the machine. The monitor began its fragile song of beeps, each one tethering Nolan's heart to hope. Is he going to make it? Nolan demanded, fists clenched white. Mira didn't look up. If we clear the water and raise his temp, maybe. But it's a fight. Evelyn appeared in the doorway, drenched. June wrapped in a blanket at her side. The girl wriggled free, rushing to Nolan. Daddy, she whispered. He saved us. Don't let him go. Nolan pulled her close, her small hand reaching to brush Sable's paw. Tears streaked her cheeks. You're the bravest dog in the world, she whispered. The monitor sputtered, its rhythm stuttering. Nolan's throat closed. He gripped the table. Come on, boy. Don't quit on me now. Mira worked furiously, suctioning fluid, compressing his chest. Breathe, soldier, she urged softly, as though calling back a fallen comrade. Minutes dragged. Nolan's mind spun with Aaron's face, his brother's laugh, the whistle code they'd shared, Sable at his side. He'd lost Aaron. He could not lose what Aaron left behind. Then the monitor screamed flat. A long, merciless tone filled the room. No. Nolan staggered. knees giving way. His forehead pressed against the steel, fists pounding. Not him too. God, please, don't take him too. Mira didn't stop. Come back, Sable. Not after this. Not after she called you her hero. Evelyn moved forward, her rosary trembling in her hands. She unclasped the chain from her neck and laid the pendant, Aaron's photograph, on Sable's paw. Her voice was steady. If there's mercy left, Lord, let him carry his master's spirit back. Don't let the story end here. Nolan's tears soaked the shepherd's fur. I should have been there. For Aaron, for you. But if you come back now, I'll never run again. I'll protect June. I'll honor Aaron. I swear it. For 2 endless minutes, the line stayed flat. The storm rattled the windows, thunder rolling like drums of war. Then, a twitch. Sable's chest heaved once, shallow but real. The monitor broke its silence with a single halting beep. Then another. Then a rhythm. Rosa gasped. Mira exhaled in relief. We've got him. Nolan collapsed forward, arms around Sable's soaked fur. You came back, he sobbed. Evelyn whispered prayers of thanks. June pressed her cheek to his side, whispering again, I knew you were too brave to leave. For the first time that night, Nolan believed her. Relief was fragile, hanging in the room like spun glass. The monitor's beeps steadied, machines hummed, and hope returned to June's wide eyes. Nolan stayed at Sable's side, his hand gripping the shepherd's paw as if he could anchor him to life by sheer will. But peace in Riverton never lasted. The first sound came sharp through the storm, boots on gravel, deliberate. Then a metallic click. The front windows exploded inward. Glass rained across the floor. A flashbang hissed, bursting white. Evelyn shielded June beneath her shawl. Nolan threw up an arm as the blast rattled the walls. Figures stormed through the breach, black-clad, masked, their movements crisp, professional. Contractors, the ones Collins had warned about. Target confirmed. Secure the dog. Sable stirred on the table, weak but alive, his amber eyes snapping open at the command. Instinct roared awake. He tried to rise, legs trembling. Stay down, boy, Nolan begged, hand on his shoulder. But Sable's gaze wasn't pleading. It was resolute. Another pane shattered. A second team entered, dragging a reinforced kennel. Its door swung open like a coffin. June screamed, No, don't take him. Her cry lit a fire in the shepherd. With a ragged growl, he tore free of the wires, leaping off the table. 4 lines ripped loose, machines toppled, alarms shrieked. But Sable planted himself in front of June, lowered and snarling, teeth flashing in defiance. One contractor swore. How the hell is he on his feet? Trank him, another barked, rifle rising. The shotgun blast cut him off. The contractor staggered, weapon flying. Captain James Shepherd stepped through the shattered glass, silhouette framed in smoke and lightning. His stance was battlefield steel, shotgun leveled, voice a growl. Not tonight. From the side hall, Sheriff Donovan burst in, pistol drawn. Drop your weapons. The contractors hesitated. They hadn't expected resistance this sharp. One lunged anyway. Shepherd's second shot sent him sprawling. Donovan's bullet slammed the kennel aside, metal clanging. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked. Equipment crashed. Evelyn dragged June under the counter. Nolan grabbed a fallen IV stand and swung it like a spear, knocking a contractor back. Through it all, Sable held his ground. Weak, trembling, but immovable, he barred the path to June. Every growl, every snap of his jaws declared, "You will not touch her." One intruder tried to circle wide. Sable lunged, teeth sinking into his arm. The man screamed, staggering, as Nolan ripped him away and slammed him against the wall until he crumpled. The remaining contractors faltered. Shepard's shotgun swept the room like a predator's gaze. Donovan's voice cut sharp. "Last chance. Drop it, or I'll drop you." Sirens wailed in the distance. "Back up." The intruders cursed, retreating through the broken windows, covering each other as they vanished into the storm. In less than a minute, silence returned, broken only by June's sobs and the shrill beeping of ruined machines. Sable sagged, collapsing to the floor. Nolan dropped beside him, cradling the shepherd's head in his lap. His hands shook as he stroked wet fur. "You stubborn soldier," he whispered, his throat tight. "You should be on that table, but instead, you're still protecting us." June crawled out from Evelyn's arms, her tiny hands stroking Sable's muzzle. "He saved me again, Daddy. He always saves me." Shepard lowered his shotgun, eyes still hard, but voice softer. "That dog isn't just a survivor. He's a fighter, and he knows exactly who he belongs to." Donovan holstered his pistol, surveying the wreckage. His jaw was grim. "This is bigger than Griggs, bigger than Harmon's order. Whoever these men are, they won't stop." He looked at Nolan. "And neither can you." Nolan held Sable tighter, his decision already carved into his bones. "Then we won't wait for them." His eyes burned with something fiercer than grief, sharper than fear. He looked at Shepard, at Donovan, at the battered shepherd in his arms. "They came for him tonight," Nolan said quietly. "Next time, we will go to them." The clinic had quieted at last. The broken windows were boarded. Shards swept into glittering piles beneath the fluorescent lights. Deputies had come and gone, their reports thick with disbelief that armed men had tried to steal a half-dead shepherd from a family's side. Evelyn sat in the corner with June curled against her, the child finally asleep, her face streaked with dried tears. Nolan hadn't moved from the blanket-padded floor where Sable lay. The dog's breaths came slow but steady, his chest rising like a fragile promise Nolan clung to. Every flicker of amber eyes loosened one knot in his chest, only to tighten another. The door creaked. Captain James Shepard stepped in, still damp from the storm, a small envelope in his hand. His gaze swept the room. June asleep, Evelyn worn but watchful, before settling on Nolan. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Nolan rose stiffly, his body aching from the river, the fight, the years. "If this is about your contractors, it's not." Shepard's voice was clipped, though not unkind. He lifted the envelope. Its edges were worn, the ink smudged, the handwriting unmistakable. Aaron's handwriting. Nolan froze. "Where did you get that?" "From Aaron himself," Shepard answered. His jaw tightened. "Weeks before he was killed, he asked me to keep it safe, told me to deliver it when the time was right." Nolan's hand trembled as he reached for it. But Shepard didn't let go immediately. "This isn't just a letter," he said, eyes steady. "It's his last order, his last gift. Are you ready for that?" Nolan swallowed hard. "Yes." The envelope felt impossibly light and unbearably heavy all at once. His name sprawled across the front in Aaron's hurried loops, as though written in a stolen moment between missions. Nolan tore it open, unfolding the lined paper inside. His brother's words stared back in smudged blue ink. Nolan read aloud, his voice breaking over each line. Nolan, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it home. Don't carry guilt for that. I chose this path, same as you chose yours. I don't regret it. Nolan's throat constricted, but he forced himself on. There's something I need you to know. Sable is more than a partner. He's family. He's saved me more times than I can count. And if the day comes when I'm gone and he's not, don't let him be left behind. Let him protect you. Let him protect June. Nolan pressed the letter to his chest. His daughter's name, written years ago, before she could even spell it herself. Aaron had seen something coming. The next lines blurred through tears. I know you've never trusted dogs the way I have. I know you still carry the scars from when we were kids. But trust him, Nolan. He's not just any shepherd. He carries every ounce of loyalty I had for you, for our family, for the life we swore to protect. Nolan sank into the chair beside Sable, gripping the dog's paw in one hand and the letter in the other. I'm sorry, Aaron, he whispered. God, I'm so sorry. Evelyn's hand rested gently on his shoulder. He forgave you long before you ever asked. Shepard stepped closer, his voice softer. Aaron didn't doubt you. Not for a second. That's why he left Sable with you. Because he knew you'd find your way through the grief. Because he knew June would need you both. Nolan bowed his head until his forehead pressed to Sable's fur. The words he had never dared say finally broke free. I forgive myself. It sounded foreign on his tongue, but once spoken, the air in his chest shifted, lighter. He said it again, steadier. I forgive myself. The monitor beeped in steady rhythm, punctuating the vow. Sable stirred, his eyes fluttering open, paw twitching faintly against Nolan's arm, as if to seal the truth written in ink and blood. Your family, Nolan whispered. Aaron was right. Your family. For the first time since the folded flag was pressed into his hands, the weight of guilt eased, replaced not by absence, but by Aaron's presence, carried forward in the heartbeat of the dog who had come home. The letter lay folded on the counter, edges soft with age, words burning in Nolan's chest like a brand. Silence stretched until Shepard finally spoke, his posture stiff with unspent truths. The Army doesn't let assets like Sable just disappear, he said. Officially, he's government property, a classified unit. Presumed dead, yes, but now that he's surfaced, there are people who'll want him back, people who'll see him as nothing more than millions of dollars on 4 legs. Nolan's hand dropped protectively to Sable's paw. He's not property. He's family. Shepard nodded. I know that. Aaron knew that. But law and loyalty don't always match. Higher up the chain, they don't care about loyalty, only what Sable can do. The room tightened with tension. Evelyn's arms wrapped tighter around June. The little girl's voice, muffled but fierce, broke through. They can't take him. He belongs with us. Nolan met Shepard's gaze, fire in his eyes. If they try, they'll go through me. Shepard didn't flinch. Instead, he lowered his voice. There's another way. Aaron's letter changes things. His will, his intent, matters. I still have friends in the right places. If I push, I can argue for retirement. Officially, no missions, no contractors, no claims. Sable would be yours. Forever. Nolan's breath caught. Retirement? Shepard nodded. It's rare, but it happens. Dogs are retired when they're too old, too injured, or when their handlers die. Aaron's letter makes this case extraordinary. With the right signatures, I can make it official. But understand the catch. Once he's retired, the army washes its hands. No backup, no protection. If those men come back, it's on you. Nolan looked down at the shepherd sprawled in blankets, battered but alive. He thought of the SUV in the dark, the garage break-in, the shattered clinic glass. He thought of June clinging to Sable's neck as the flood rose, and he thought of Aaron's letter. Let him protect you. Let him protect June. Do it, Nolan said firmly. Retire him. Make it official. For a moment, Shepard simply studied him, as if seeing the soldier Nolan had buried beneath years of guilt. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. I'll file the paperwork. It won't be easy or quick, but I'll make it happen. Relief shimmered across Evelyn's face, fragile but real. June peeked out from her grandmother's shawl. Does that mean he gets to stay? Nolan crouched, brushing a curl from her damp cheek. Yeah, Junebug. He stays, just like Uncle Aaron wanted. Sable stirred at her voice, lifting his head weakly. His eyes found June first, then Nolan, then Shepard. His tail swept once across the blanket, slow but certain, as if he understood. Nolan pressed his forehead to the shepherd's. You hear that, boy? You're home. No one's taking you. Not now, not ever. From the window, Shepard's silhouette cut against the fading storm. Then it's settled, he said quietly. Sergeant Sable is no longer property of the United States Army. He belongs to the Hartleys. The weeks that followed were not marked by storms or firefights, but by something harder. Healing. Riverbend Veterinary Clinic became a second home. Every few days, Nolan drove Sable there, June tucked in beside him, Evelyn humming softly in the back seat. Dr. Mira Reeves charted his progress with cautious optimism. He's a fighter, she told them. But fighters need time. Time, June decided, would be filled with stories. She curled on the floor beside Sable's bed, reading from her tattered copy of Call of the Wild. Her small voice carried across the garage, pausing only to glance up at the shepherd's amber eyes. And then Buck knew, she whispered, that he belonged to the wild. But he still loved the man who saved him. She looked up at Nolan, who leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, a rare softness in his eyes. See, Daddy? It's just like Sable. He could be anywhere. But he's here with us. Yeah, Junebug, Nolan said, his throat tight. Just like that. The milestones came slow, but steady. First, standing. One morning, Sable pushed up onto shaky legs, June clapping with delight. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, murmuring thanks like a prayer. Then, trotting. Nolan walked him in the yard, leash slack, whispering encouragement. When Sable circled the grass without faltering, Nolan dropped to one knee, burying his face in the shepherd's fur. You did it, soldier, he whispered. And finally, the squirrel. Sable burst forward, muscles rippling, amber eyes alight. The squirrel darted up the oak, but the chase mattered more than the outcome. For the first time since the flood, Nolan saw him whole again. Somewhere along the way, Nolan found healing too. He began rising before dawn, jogging through Riverton's half-light. At first alone, haunted by memories. Then one morning, Sable nudged his side at the door, eyes burning with insistence. You sure? Nolan asked softly. The shepherd barked once. From then on, they ran together. Slowly at first, step for step. Shopkeepers lifted shutters, milk trucks groaned awake, and Nolan felt a world reborn. The scarred shepherd at his side wasn't a reminder of Aaron's death. He was Aaron's gift. Some mornings, June stood on the porch in her pajamas, inhaler clutched, waving as they disappeared down the street. "Bring him back strong, Daddy," she called. Nolan always waved back, his chest lighter than it had been in years. One sunrise, as gold spilled over Riverton, Nolan slowed, sweat streaking his brow. He glanced at the shepherd trotting beside him. "You know," he said, voice low, "I think Aaron would have liked this. He'd say I finally stopped running from what scared me." Sable turned, amber eyes catching his. His tail swept once, and he surged forward into a stronger stride, pulling Nolan along. A laugh startled from Nolan's chest, freer than he thought possible. "All right, boy," he said. "Lead the way." And for the first time in years, Nolan wasn't running from the past. He was running toward something. The Hartley living room had never looked so solemn, nor so alive. Evelyn had drawn the lace curtains, polished the photo frames until they gleamed. June insisted on setting mismatched chairs into rows facing the fireplace. And on the mantel sat Aaron's folded flag, its stars glowing in the morning light. The storm had passed weeks ago, but Riverton was still healing. Tonight wasn't about wreckage. It was about honoring the one who had carried them through it. Scarred, loyal, unyielding. Sable lay on a rug before the hearth, his coat brushed until it shone. His muscles still trembled now and then, but his amber eyes held the same fire as the soldier he once was. June knelt beside him, straightening the red, white, and blue ribbon around his neck. "You look like a real hero," she whispered. His tail swept once, slow and steady. The front door opened. Captain James Shepherd stepped inside, his uniform pressed, medals faintly gleaming. In his arms was a small wooden box. Sheriff Donovan followed, hat tucked respectfully under his arm. "Doctor." Mira Reeves came last, still in her white coat, her smile gentle as she sat beside Evelyn. The room hushed as Shepherd placed the box on the table. He opened it carefully. Inside lay a polished bronze medal on a blue ribbon, the kind awarded not for victories, but for service beyond measure. His voice carried command, but also tenderness. "Today isn't official army business, no ranks, no salutes. But it is just as important, because today we honor a soldier who gave everything, and more." He looked at Sable, who lifted his head as if listening. Sergeant Sable served with distinction overseas. He saved lives, endured what no dog should endure, and found his way home against impossible odds. But his greatest service was here, to this family, to this town, to a little girl he chose to protect when no one else could. June's hand squeezed Sable's paw. Shepherd bent, pinned the medal to the ribbon around his neck, and whispered, "Job well done, Sergeant Sable. Welcome home." Gentle applause filled the room. Evelyn dabbed her eyes. Donovan's stern face softened. Mira pressed her hand to her chest. Then Councilman Miller, once skeptical, stepped forward with a small leather case. His voice shook slightly. "On behalf of Riverton, we honor not only his service abroad, but what he's done here. He risked his life to save our children, and for that, we name him honorary member of Riverton Search and Rescue." He opened the case to reveal a silver badge engraved with the town's seal. Kneeling awkwardly, he pinned it to Sable's collar beneath the medal. "You'll always have a place in this town," he said. June hugged the dog fiercely. "See, Sable, you're a real officer now, just like Daddy." Nolan, standing in back, felt his throat tighten. For once he didn't fight it. He crouched beside them, laying a hand on the shepherd's back. Not just like me, he murmured. Better. The fire crackled. Shepherd straightened and raised a slow salute, not rigid, but deliberate, a soldier's respect for another. And in that small living room, surrounded by warmth, pride, and the memory of a fallen brother, Sergeant Sable was no longer just a dog. He was a hero, finally given his due. 2 days later, Riverton's main street swelled with more people than it had since the county fair before the flood. The town square, once hollowed by fear, buzzed with chatter and the scent of cinnamon rolls drifting from Mrs. Weller's bakery. Children darted between benches while parents lingered, their voices softened by something Riverton had nearly forgotten: relief. At the center stood Nolan, June, and Sable. The shepherd wore both a medal and badge, his head held high despite his limp. June clutched his leash proudly, puffing her chest like she was leading a parade. Neighbors stopped to pat his head, thank Nolan, or whisper their gratitude to the dog once branded dangerous. Whispers of stray and killer had been replaced with hero and protector. Children who once crossed the street to avoid him now crowded close. One boy pressed a hand to his heart. "He's like a real superhero." June's grin nearly split her face. The greatest shift came when Sheriff Donovan marched Albert Griggs down those same streets in handcuffs. The chicken farmer who had raged loudest had been unmasked as a conspirator. His farm had hidden the very contractors who tried to steal Sable. In his barn, deputies uncovered surveillance gear, payment ledgers, foreign accounts. The man who once waved a shotgun at June had been revealed as nothing more than a coward. With his arrest, Judge Harmon's removal order collapsed. Poisonous rumors withered. Riverton's eyes turned toward the Hartleys, not with suspicion, but with gratitude. Neighbors approached Evelyn, pressing her hands, whispering apologies for the things they had once said. She only nodded with quiet dignity. "Thank you for seeing the truth." At the edge of the square, Nolan spotted Mira Reeves. Today she wore a green sweater and jeans instead of her white coat, but to Nolan, she still carried the aura of someone who had fought and won a battle. Without her, Sable would not have been alive to wear his medals. She crossed to them, kneeling to scratch Sable behind the ears. "Well, Sergeant," she teased, "looks like you're more famous than the rest of us put together." Sable leaned heavily into her hand. Nolan chuckled, his eyes softer than they'd been in years. "He's earned it." Their gazes met. For a moment, the noise of the square receded. There were no grand declarations, just quiet recognition. Two people bound by survival, and the stubborn life of a dog who refused to die. "Thank you," Nolan said, voice low, weighted. Mira's cheeks warmed with color. "You don't have to thank me. He wanted to live. I just helped him do it." She glanced at Nolan, eyes lingering. "So did you." Before Nolan could answer, June tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, they want Sable on the stage." Sheriff Donovan stood with a microphone at the front, his voice booming. "Let's hear it for Riverton's own hero, Sergeant Sable." The crowd erupted in cheers, applause rolling like thunder through the square. Nolan lifted June onto his shoulders, her little hands waving proudly as Sable trotted beside them, medal and badge gleaming in the autumn sun. Mira walked with them, and for the first time in years, Nolan felt the weight on his shoulders ease. As the applause swelled, Nolan glanced sideways. Mira caught his gaze and smiled, subtle, fleeting, but real. For the first time, Riverton wasn't divided. It was whole. And in the center of its reconciliation stood a battered shepherd who had refused to quit. a child who had never stopped believing, and a man learning that forgiveness could be as steady as dawn. Evening fell soft across Riverton, snow replacing storm. Flakes drifted against the Hartley windows, blanketing the world in white silence. Inside, fire crackled in the hearth, its glow chasing away shadows. Evelyn rocked gently, knitting needles clicking. Her eyes softened with pride instead of grief. Sable lay stretched on the rug, head on his paws, chest rising in steady rhythm. Above him on the mantel, his medal and badge gleamed beside Aaron's folded flag. For weeks he had fought through storm, through bullets, through death's pull. Now, at last, he could rest. June sat cross-legged in pajamas, book open on her lap. Her voice carried softly as she read from Call of the Wild. And Buck knew, she whispered, tracing the line, that he could never go back to the way things had been. But he carried the love of those who saved him, always. Closing the book, she stroked Sable's fur. That's you. You came back to us, and you'll always stay. His tail swept once across the rug. Nolan leaned in the doorway, arms folded. He had jogged with Sable at dawn, repaired fences in the afternoon, and now, standing here, he felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. Not the brittle silence of grief, but a living peace that filled the cracks Aaron's death had left behind. His eyes drifted to the mantel. For the first time, Aaron's flag did not feel like an anchor. It felt like a torch passed forward. Nolan crossed the room, lowering himself onto the couch. June's head began to droop with sleep, her small hand still tangled in Sable's fur. Evelyn's knitting slowed. The fire popped. Nolan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He whistled. One long rise, two short bursts. The old code. A sound he hadn't dared make since Aaron was alive. Sable's ears flicked. His head lifted. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then his tail swept once, slow and certain, across the rug. Recognition. Nolan's throat burned. He pressed his forehead to the shepherd's, whispering, "You remember." Sable nudged his knee, steady, sealing the bond. And in that moment, Nolan felt Aaron there with them, not as a ghost but as a presence. The fire crackled. Snow drifted. A family once broken sat whole again. "You're home, boy," Nolan whispered. And for the first time since the folded flag was pressed into his hands, Nolan believed it. Sometimes the most powerful stories don't come from people at all, but from the quiet, steady loyalty of a dog. German shepherds remind us that love isn't about words. It's about presence, about standing by when the world feels heavy, about protecting and healing in ways only they can. These bonds between humans and dogs carry us through storms, and they linger long after the noise fades. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt they understood more than you could say, you know exactly what I mean. There are resources out there that can help deepen that connection, little guides and communities that share ways to strengthen the trust and companionship we already feel. I'll leave a link here in case you'd like to explore it for yourself. No pressure, no pitch, just something that might bring you and your four-legged friend a little closer. Because at the end of the day, what matters most isn't the medals or the stories. It's the quiet moments by the fire, the tail thumping softly against the floor, and knowing that you are never truly alone. Take care, friend, and give your dog an extra pat tonight.